My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 43 years old. 3 weeks ago, I discovered my husband had been sleeping with his boss for 6 months. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't confront him the moment I found out. I did what writers do. I watched. I documented. Then I started planning. The restaurant Daniel chose that night was the kind of place where the lighting probably cost more than the food. Soft amber lamps hung low over each table, white tablecloths, candles floating inside tall glass hurricanes. The quiet murmur of expensive conversations drifted through the room like background music. Daniel always picked places like this when he had something difficult to say. Places where people behaved, where no one raised their voice, where emotions stayed hidden behind polite smiles. "You've been quiet tonight," Daniel said, his fingers circling the stem of his wine glass without actually lifting it. He looked nervous. That told me enough. "Just thinking," I said calmly, cutting into my steak. "Long day." Daniel shifted in his chair. "Claire, we need to talk." There it was. The sentence that changes everything. I set my fork down slowly and looked at him, really looked at him. Daniel Bennett, 42. Still handsome in the way men age when life has mostly been kind to them. Dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples. The same careful smile he'd used when we first met 17 years ago. But tonight there was something else beneath it. Guilt. "I'm listening," I said. He took a breath. "I've been seeing someone from work." Silence settled between us. "It's Eleanor," he continued. "Eleanor Ashford." The name meant something. Eleanor Ashford, publisher, CEO, wealthy, connected, the sort of woman whose success entered a room before she did. 47. The kind of woman magazines called formidable. I should have felt something dramatic in that moment. Rage, panic, the sharp heat of betrayal. Instead, I felt something stranger. Clarity. Because I had known for 3 weeks and 4 days. Ever since the afternoon I came home early from a bookstore event and found Daniel's laptop open on the kitchen counter. Messages glowing on the screen. Hotel confirmations. Photos. The kind of messages people send when they believe no one else will ever see them. "How long?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He flinched. 6 months. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of kisses goodbye at the door while another woman waited somewhere across the city. 6 months of dinners with our children while his mind lived somewhere else. Our son Dylan, 15. Our daughter Sophie, 11. Children who believed their parents' marriage was solid. "Are you in love with her?" I asked. Daniel's face tightened. "I don't know what I feel anymore." He stared down at the tablecloth as if the answer might be written there. "When I'm with Eleanor, I feel alive, like I matter." He looked up. "With you, Claire, sometimes I feel like I'm just supporting your life, handling bills and schedules while you chase novels and deadlines." The words landed too neatly. Practiced, as if he'd rehearsed them. I want a divorce. There it was. The nuclear option, delivered politely between the entree and dessert. "Okay," I said. Daniel blinked. "Okay?" "Okay," I repeated. He stared at me as if he had misheard. "That's it?" "What would you like me to do?" I asked evenly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I don't know. React? Be upset?" "You've clearly made up your mind." Daniel leaned back in his chair, unsettled now. The script he expected wasn't unfolding. The rest of dinner passed in careful silence. We paid the bill, walked outside. Cold night air wrapped around us as we stood beside the car. Daniel cleared his throat. "I think I'll stay at my sister's tonight," he said. "Probably for the best." He hesitated, waiting, for anger, for tears, for something. When none came, he finally got into the car and drove away. The house felt larger after he left. Quieter. I walked through their dark hallway, past framed photos from vacations and birthdays, and into my study. My office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Stacks of manuscript pages covered the desk. A half-finished novel glowed on my computer screen. But I didn't open the document. Instead, I opened a private folder on my laptop. Untitled. Inside were 3 weeks of preparation. Screenshots of messages. Credit card statements with hotel charges. Calendar entries that didn't match Daniel's work schedule. Receipts from restaurants he'd told me he'd never visited. I had been collecting everything, not because I knew exactly what I would do with it, but because writers understand something important. Details matter, and truth hides in details. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. 3 weeks earlier, finding those messages had felt like the ground opening beneath my feet. But shock has a short lifespan. After that comes clarity. I opened another window and dialed a number I knew by memory. David Patterson answered on the third ring. "Claire, everything okay?" David had been my lawyer for nearly a decade. He handled publishing contracts, royalties, intellectual property disputes. He also happened to be one of the best divorce attorneys in Manhattan. I think my marriage just ended, I said. Silence. Then the rustle of paper on his desk. Do you want to come in tomorrow morning? Yes. What happened? My husband is sleeping with his boss. David exhaled slowly. Understood. There was another pause. Claire, how vindictive are we feeling tonight? I glanced back at the folder of evidence glowing on my screen. I don't want revenge, I said. That part was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I want what's fair, I continued, and I want to understand who I'm dealing with. You mean the boss? Yes. What's her name? Eleanor Ashford. The silence on the other end stretched a little longer this time. That's interesting. How so? David cleared his throat. Let's talk tomorrow. I closed the laptop. For a moment, the room sat completely silent. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. We should talk about the house and the kids. Maybe this weekend. I stared at the screen. Then I turned the phone face down. Not tonight. Tonight I had something else to think about. Because there was one detail that kept circling through my mind. One question that refused to leave. If Eleanor Ashford was Daniel's boss, then somewhere in this city, there was a man who was about to discover his wife had been sleeping with my husband. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt the faintest spark of curiosity. Maybe I should meet him. David Patterson's office sat on the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Manhattan, the kind of building that made every problem feel expensive before anyone even spoke. The reception area smelled like coffee, leather, and polished stone. By the time I was shown into David's office the next morning, he already had a folder waiting on the desk. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. David never wasted time pretending a crisis was smaller than it was. He stood when I entered, gave me a quick, sympathetic look, and gestured for me to sit. You look steadier than most people do the morning after a confession like that, he said. I didn't find out last night, I replied. His eyebrows lifted. How long? 3 weeks and 4 days. David sat down slowly. And in that time, I gathered evidence. A faint, grim smile touched his mouth. Of course you did. I slid a printed stack across the desk. Screenshots. Charges. Travel receipts. Calendar discrepancies. A photograph Daniel had sent Eleanor from a hotel room mirror, smiling like a man who believed consequences only happened to other people. David looked through the pages in silence, his expression tightening by degrees. When he finished, he placed the file neatly on top of the folder he'd prepared. Given that New York is an equitable distribution state, he said, and there's no prenup, this is going to be unpleasant. I assumed as much. We'll need to separate emotion from leverage. That won't be hard. He studied me for a second, as if trying to decide whether that was strength or shock. Then he opened his folder. Inside were spreadsheets covering every major piece of our life. The house, joint accounts, retirement funds, college savings, my royalties from 3 published novels and 2 foreign licensing deals. 17 years of marriage turned into columns, percentages, and possible outcomes. There was something obscene about it. You build a life with someone, children, routines, inside jokes, holidays, mortgage payments, grief, repairs, school pickup schedules, flu seasons, anniversaries, and in the end, someone reduces it to line items. David flipped to another page. I also had my team run a preliminary review of recent transfers. I looked up. Transfers? He turned the document toward me. Highlighted in yellow were dozens of smaller withdrawals over the last 30 months. Not dramatic enough individually to trigger immediate alarm, but together they formed a pattern. A deliberate one. My stomach tightened as my eyes moved down the page. 10,000 here, 4,000 there, 12,000 routed through a secondary account, then a wire transfer, then another. How much? I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. David tapped the total at the bottom, just under $95,000. For a moment, I said nothing. I only stared. The number looked unreal printed on white paper. $95,000. Money taken from our family slowly enough to avoid detection. Money that should have gone toward our children's future. Repairs on the house, Sophie's school tuition, Dylan's college fund, or simply remained where it belonged. Instead, Daniel had been building an exit strategy with it, or funding an affair, or both. He's planning, David said quietly. Yes, that strengthens your position if we document intent. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Can he argue it was marital spending? He can argue anything, David said. That doesn't mean he'll win. I nodded. Then I asked the question that had been forming since the previous night. What do you know about Eleanor Ashford? David didn't answer immediately. He reached for his keyboard, clicked through something on his screen, then looked back at me. Eleanor Ashford, CEO and publisher. Married to Marcus Ashford. Old money on his side, newer power on hers. She sits on boards, donates to museums, appears in magazines, and, according to rumors she's paid very well to keep quiet, has a long history of blurred boundaries with people who work under her. Rumors, I repeated. David gave a small shrug. Nothing you can use in court, but enough to suggest your husband may not be the first. Her husband knows? That, David said, is harder to say. I looked past him at the windows behind his desk. Manhattan stretched out in steel and glass under a pale gray sky. Everything looked clean from that height, orderly, controlled. But the truth of most lives was messier. Mine certainly was. What if I wanted to meet him? I asked. David's expression shifted. That could go very badly. Or it could level the field. I folded my hands in my lap. I'm not asking because I want drama. He gave me a look that said he knew I was only half telling the truth. I'm asking because people like Eleanor and Daniel count on isolation, I said. They count on the people they hurt staying separate, confused, embarrassed, and quiet. David leaned back. That is a dangerously intelligent sentence, Claire. I write for a living. You also strategize for a living, whether you admit it or not. He closed the folder. Fine. Meet him if you can do it carefully. No threats, no illegal nonsense, no emotional grandstanding. If he already suspects something, you may gain an ally. If he doesn't, you may detonate his life in public. I'm aware. David slid a business card across the desk. Call me before you do anything reckless. I never do anything reckless. David glanced at me. You write novels for a living. Let's not say things we both know aren't true. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I almost smiled. By the time I got home, the house had that hollow daytime silence it always had after school, but before everyone fully settled in. I expected emptiness. Instead, I found Dylan at the kitchen counter with his laptop open and his backpack still on the floor beside him. He looked up when I came in. His face was too controlled, too adult. My son had my eyes, and Daniel's height already beginning to show in his shoulders. 15 was a brutal age for family implosions, old enough to understand betrayal, too young to be protected from it once it started. Did your father call? I asked. Dylan nodded once. He wants dinner this weekend, says we should talk about the transition. The word made my skin crawl. Transition. As if the collapse of a marriage were a rebranding exercise. What did you tell him? I asked. That I'd think about it. I set my bag on the counter. That was smart. Dylan looked at me for a long second. Then he turned the laptop toward me. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. A file directory? Dozens of folders. Dates. Audio clips. Screen captures. Backups. My pulse slowed instead of quickening, which somehow felt worse. What is this? He swallowed. I've been recording him. The room went very still. For how long? Almost a year. I stared at him. Dylan! I know how that sounds. No, I said softly. You don't. His jaw tightened. He stopped acting normal a long time ago, Mom. He would go outside to take calls. He'd lower his voice when he said her name. He kept changing passwords. He started lying about stupid things first, then bigger things. He clicked on one of the files. A muffled recording filled the kitchen. Daniel's voice, clear enough to recognize instantly. Then a woman's voice, smooth, low, amused. Eleanor. A chill moved through me. Dylan stopped the audio after less than 20 seconds. I didn't want to be crazy, he said. I kept thinking maybe I was hearing things wrong. Maybe I was taking normal work stuff and turning it into something ugly. He opened another folder. Screenshots. Timestamps. Notes. Patterns he had tracked for months. He wasn't just cheating, Dylan said. He was moving money. My throat tightened. I know. His eyes flicked up sharply. You know? I found out this morning how much. How much did David say? Just under $95,000. Dylan let out one bitter, humorless laugh. Yeah, that's what I figured too. For a second, I could only look at him. Not because I doubted the evidence. Because I was suddenly faced with the fact that while I had been trying to preserve normalcy, my son had been quietly living inside suspicion for months. What else do you have? I asked gently. He clicked another folder. Hours of calls. Not all of it is useful. Some of it is just enough to prove the pattern. Some of it... He hesitated. Some of it is bad. How bad? He looked away. Bad enough that I stopped hoping it would fix itself. I sat down across from him. The counter between us suddenly felt like too much distance, so I moved to the stool beside him. Why didn't you tell me? That was the question that mattered. Not legally. Not strategically. As a mother. As someone who should have seen what her son had been carrying alone. Dylan stared at the laptop screen for several seconds before answering. Because you kept protecting him. The words were quiet. They hurt anyway. He kept going before I could respond. You always covered for him. If he missed dinner, you said he was working. If he forgot something for Sophie, you reminded her he'd been stressed. If he looked checked out, you said adults go through phases. His voice tightened. You were protecting him when someone should have been protecting us. I felt the air leave my lungs. There are moments when your child says something so honest it bypasses defense entirely. This was one of them. You're right, I said. Dylan looked at me, startled. I should have seen more. I should have asked more questions. And I should never have let you carry any of this by yourself. Something in his face shifted then. Not relief exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. He nodded once. I kept hoping I was wrong. I reached over and closed the laptop gently. You shouldn't have had to prove your father's betrayal like a private investigator. A muscle in Dylan's jaw moved. Are you going to use it? Yes, as much as I need to. He looked down at his hands. Good. There was no triumph in his voice, only exhaustion. Sophie came bounding into the kitchen 10 minutes later, talking about school and a girl in her class who had cried because someone spilled paint water on a project. She dropped her backpack, asked what was for dinner, and complained that the house felt strange. Children always know. Even when they don't know the facts, they know when the air has changed. I made pasta mostly because it was mechanical and familiar. Dylan helped without being asked. Sophie chattered through half the meal, then stopped mid-sentence and looked between us. Is Dad staying somewhere else? There it was. No dramatic reveal. No perfect moment. Just an 11-year-old girl asking the question no one had wanted to answer yet. For now, I said carefully. Why? I glanced at Dylan. He looked down at his plate. Because your father and I are having grown-up problems, I said, and we're figuring out what happens next. Sophie frowned. Did you fight? Not exactly. She twisted pasta around her fork, thinking. Then, in the heartbreaking way children sometimes do, she asked, Is this my fault because I forgot my science packet and he had to bring it to school? I reached for her hand immediately. No, absolutely not. None of this is your fault. She studied my face as if testing whether to believe me. Finally, she nodded. After dinner, after homework, after Sophie was asleep and Dylan had shut himself in his room, I sat alone in my study again. This time I didn't open the evidence folder first. I opened Instagram. I searched Marcus Ashford. His account was private. The profile photo showed a man standing in front of a large, abstract painting. One hand in his pocket, expression unreadable. Mid-40s, dark suit, intelligent eyes. The kind of face that suggested a person who listened more than he spoke. His bio was short. Former curator, current observer, always looking for beauty in unexpected places. Former curator. So David had been right. I searched through tagged posts connected to his name until I found what I needed. A Chelsea gallery opening scheduled for Friday evening. Marcus had commented beneath the announcement. Looking forward to this one. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I sent a follow request. A little reckless. A little obvious. But not enough to matter. 3 minutes later, it was accepted. I leaned back slowly. Friday. 2 days away. I had no script for what I would say to a man whose wife had been sleeping with my husband. No clean plan. Only instinct. And instinct was telling me something very clearly. Whatever Eleanor Ashford and Daniel thought they were controlling, they were no longer the only ones shaping what happened next. The Chelsea gallery opening was exactly the kind of event I normally avoided. Crowded rooms. People pretending to understand modern art while holding fragile glasses of expensive wine. Strategic conversations disguised as casual ones. But that Friday evening, I walked into the gallery anyway. I wore jeans and a dark blazer, casual enough to blend in, polished enough not to attract attention. The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Soft music drifted from hidden speakers. Spotlights illuminated massive abstract canvases that looked like emotional storms painted in oil. People clustered in small circles, nodding thoughtfully at paintings they clearly didn't understand. I moved slowly through the space, pretending to study the art while scanning the room. Then I saw him. Marcus Ashford stood near the back wall, alone in front of a large canvas painted almost entirely in dark blues and fractured whites. He was taller than I expected. Lean, composed. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and he wore a charcoal suit without a tie. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was studying the painting with quiet focus. I walked over and stopped beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The painting looked like a storm caught just before lightning. What do you see? I asked. Marcus didn't look at me immediately. A moment before everything falls apart, he said calmly. That tension right before the storm breaks. His voice was steady, thoughtful. I used to curate exhibits like this, he continued. Now he turned toward me. His eyes were sharp, but not hostile. Now I mostly observe. I smiled slightly. I'm a writer, I said. I observe for a living too. Fiction? Yes. What kind? The kind where people slowly realize the life they thought they were living was never really theirs. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Those are usually the most honest stories, he said. We walked through this gallery together after that. At first, the conversation stayed neutral. Marcus explained how the artist used negative space to create emotional tension. He talked about what a painting leaves unsaid being as important as what it shows. There was something calming about listening to him. He spoke like someone who once loved this world deeply. "Why did you stop curating?" I asked eventually. Marcus gave a small, humorless smile. "My wife's company went public." That was all he said at first. But the meaning behind the sentence carried weight. "I became the kind of husband who attends charity dinners and sits on boards," he continued. "The kind who smiles politely while pretending he's not watching the life he built slowly disappear." There was no bitterness in his voice, only exhaustion. Loneliness recognizes loneliness very quickly. "I understand that more than you think," I said quietly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Daniel. "We need to talk about the house and the kids. Can you meet tomorrow?" I silenced it without answering. Marcus noticed. "Trouble at home?" "Yes." He studied my face for a moment. "Divorce?" The word hung in the air between us. "Something like that," I said. Marcus nodded slowly. Strange how predictable people can be. We stopped in front of a twisted metal sculpture shaped like something that had tried to grow and then been forced into a different form. Marcus folded his arms. "Loneliness," he said thoughtfully, "is rarely loud." "No," I agreed. "It's quiet. It's giving up pieces of yourself little by little until you wake up one day and realize you don't recognize your own life." The honesty in that sentence made it impossible to keep pretending. I took a breath. "I should probably tell you the truth," I said. Marcus looked at me calmly. "That would be refreshing. I didn't come here by accident." "I assumed as much." "I looked you up." "Also assumed." I hesitated. "My husband works for your wife." That got his full attention. "Does he?" "Yes." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "And your husband's name?" "Daniel Bennett." For the first time since I'd met him, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. He let out a slow breath. "Of course it is. You've heard the name. I've seen it on a few emails." A small, tired smile crossed his face. "I didn't realize the situation was quite that symmetrical." "My wife and your husband," he said quietly. "I assume that's why you're here." "Yes." Marcus studied the sculpture in front of us for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "I wondered when this would happen." "You knew?" "Not specifically about your husband." "But about Eleanor?" He exhaled. "I hired a private investigator 8 months ago." The words landed heavier than I expected. "He documented multiple affairs," Marcus continued calmly. "Different cities, different men, always someone ambitious, someone useful." The gallery lights reflected faintly in his eyes. "My wife collects ambitious men the way some people collect vintage watches." A chill moved through me. "You stayed," I said. "Yes." "Why?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My daughter," he said finally. "Security, timing. The same reasons people stay in most broken things." There was no self-pity in the way he said it. Just truth. I rested my hands against the railing beside the sculpture. "I came here to use you," I admitted. Marcus turned his head slightly. "I suspected that too." "I wanted information about Eleanor," I said. "Something that would help in the divorce." "And now?" I met his eyes. "Now I feel like that would be dishonest." Marcus watched me carefully. "Honesty is rare in situations like this." "I write fiction," I said, "but I try not to live it." For the first time since we started talking, Marcus actually smiled. "A real one." "So," he said, "what do we do now?" "There are plenty of options," I said. "Revenge, anger, public humiliation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. But none of those would fix anything." He nodded slowly. "Then what do you suggest?" "Tell each other the truth," I said. Marcus considered that. Then he nodded. "That would be a good place to start." They left the gallery together and walked around the corner to a small coffee shop that stayed open late for the art crowd. Inside, the lights were warm and soft. They sat in a quiet booth near the back. Claire told him everything. The laptop messages, the hotel receipts, Daniel's confession at dinner. The $95,000 quietly moved out of the family accounts. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back slowly. "You're not wrong to prepare," he said. "I've already spoken to my lawyer." "Good." Then Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. "I wasn't expecting to share this tonight," he said. He slid it across the table. Inside were photographs, dates, travel logs, bank statements, evidence. The investigator had been thorough. "My investigator believes Eleanor has used company funds for some of these trips," Marcus said quietly. Claire flipped through the pages. Hotel charges, luxury gifts, flights, amounts that made Daniel's $95,000 look almost small. "How much?" she asked. Marcus tapped the last page. "Over $340,000. Claire looked up slowly. "That's not just an affair." "No," Marcus said calmly. "That's embezzlement." The weight of that realization settled over the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus leaned forward slightly. If we combine what we know, he said, they won't be able to hide it. Claire's pulse slowed into something steady and focused. What are you suggesting? Marcus met her eyes. A partnership, not revenge. Something simpler. Let the truth do the work. Claire extended her hand. Marcus took it, and in that moment the balance shifted. Because Daniel and Eleanor thought they were rewriting other people's lives. What they didn't realize was that the people they had betrayed were now comparing notes. And the truth, the real truth, was far more dangerous than either of them expected.